Mental health, how it's supposed to be understood, is what we mean by well-being. But how it is actually interpreted is mental illness. So a state of boredom is a flag, actually. That's a red flag. We should take that more as a risk factor than we do, whereas now we ignore it. But when somebody's bored with life, going through the motions, that's an intervention point.
Is happiness constant or is it fleeting?
Yes, it comes and goes. That's going to depend on your particular life circumstances, but also, can you achieve the balance? And do you know how to strive for it? Then it comes down to, what's your definition of happiness? I think we all need to get better with our own emotional literacy. So I think it's just our general angst around emotions. People are like, we don't talk about that at work. Well, whether you talk about it or not, somebody's having a panic attack in the toilet. So I think we need to do something, right? It's there no matter what. So for some cultures, there very much is the expectation that you, the company, are here to make me happy. Other cultures are like, happiness has nothing to do with work. I'm here to collect a paycheck. That's it. So another way we can think about well-being in the workplace is, how do we have respectful engagement? How do we implement human dignity in the workplace? But at the end of the day, it's, how do we see people? How do we hear people? How do we make them feel that they matter? That's it.
Dr. Louise Lambert, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you are a registered psychologist.
Yes.
Research in happiness and well-being.
Yep.
And an expertise in positive psychology.
Yes.
How would you describe yourself, though? Just like that? Or is that too clinical?
No, I love it. So it's really the science of well-being that has sort of gripped my attention over several years. So I started as a psychologist in mental health. So good old doom and gloom.
Right.
So running depression groups, working with domestic violence and eating disorders and all that interesting stuff. And then I was doing a doctorate degree and discovered this Easy A course, like the basket weaving equivalent in positive psych. And I'm like, easy, let's do this, raise my GPA. And suddenly everything changed.
What changed?
Including me. Well, I realized that this is the psychology I've always wanted, and probably what everybody has always wanted.
So let me interrupt you there just for a second. You said earlier all the interesting stuff. Most people, I don't think, would say that was interesting. And I don't always start talking about someone's journey because it can be a little bit too much like a bio.
Yeah.
But what was it that got you into something where you found it interesting, where a lot of people would perhaps shy away from that kind of thing?
Are you talking about the doom and gloom?
Yeah, all the doom and gloom in general.
So, you know what? I would love to have a beautiful answer to that, but growing up in northern Alberta, I had three options: psychology, economics, or education. Little children, they're really noisy, so I'm like, no thanks. Economics, I'm terrible at math. So that left psychology. So I got into it really kind of like, all right, let's see it. Let's do it. But more interested in probably anthropology, ethnology, sociology, more from a social perspective, which continues to be of interest today. But also, why do we do what we do? And how do people make their way out of difficult situations?
So there wasn't like there weren't those one or two or three sort of traumatic moments where that sort of pushed you into...
No, it was A, B, or C. Well, C's the better option.
And that was it?
That was it.
So another interesting thing, doing a little bit of research, thank goodness for LinkedIn nowadays.
Yeah.
You've been here since 2003.
Yes.
I've been here since 2003.
Okay.
We're both Canadian. How is it that we only met 20 minutes ago for the first time?
I don't know. There's not a lot of Canadians, actually. And yet, no, I take that back. There is. But I think Canadians, unlike other nationalities, tend not to congregate.
That's so
right?
true. Yes.
We don't.
I think in my circle, only because I play hockey. And so there are a lot of Canadians doing that.
Exactly. I think there's only Canadians doing that. Yeah. But generally, we meet other Canadians and we're like, oh, you're like home. And we gravitate to other groups.
Or you're from Alberta, I'm from Ontario.
So
I'm
we're
not
like oil and water.
Yes, exactly.
Literally.
I'm not going to hang out in that area.
We can't hang out together now.
So then getting back to you and your journey, your professional aspirations and what it is you were doing, mental health. How do you make that transition from mental health to being an expert in happiness?
Reading, studying, doing a lot of research. Look, I just committed myself to it. So when I started learning about positive psychology, I noticed a lot of changes in myself. Suddenly, I went from a state of languishing. We can talk about that in a moment. But this state of just kind of going through day to day, to suddenly going, what? There's things I can do to feel more optimistic, alive, passionate, persistent, and to just feel like life is worthwhile. And so once I got on that journey, I was like, out of my way, kids. This is what I'm doing.
Okay, so I'll play devil's advocate, and I'll say, because you're a doctor, what you're saying is really, it's rooted in science?
It is.
Tell me.
Yeah. Okay. So mainstream psychology, I kid around and call it the doom and gloom, but for a good reason. So we generally focus on aspects of life that do not go well. So depression, anxiety, major mental health disorders, schizophrenia, right? Problems in living as well. And that's good. It needs attention because when people are experiencing that, it's the pits. But we focus so much on the negative that we've forgotten there's the other half of human existence. There's the other half of human experience. There is what gets us excited to wake up in the morning, what gives meaning to life. How do we make the most of ourselves? So I remember very distinctly, and I remember who it was, and I won't say it, but I was practicing at the time, Northern Alberta. In comes this little woman. Hi, how can I help you? What's the problem today? And she said, I don't have a problem. I just want to feel better. And I said, well, I can't help you. Come back when you have a real problem. And that's the problem with psychology. So if we only focus on issues, then what about everybody else who doesn't have an issue and just wants to live life more fully? We actually have nothing to offer them because we only have tools to fix problems. So if you don't have a problem, either you have to wait till your problem's big enough so that the tool fits, or, well, we can't help you.
Okay, so
positive psychology is the tools for the other half, but equally the tools to also help people who are struggling with depression largely.
So it starts with changing a mindset and then changing habits, or is it just changing a mindset? And you're saying the same thing to yourself?
Changing everything.
Changing everything.
So in mainstream psychology, we would use cognitive strategies, changing how you think. We would use behavioral strategies, changing what you do. We'd also include relational strategies, so changing how you relate to people. In positive psychology, we do the same thing, only the target is slightly different. So here the target is improving positive emotional experiences. That's one. It could be improving quality of life, life satisfaction, appreciation for lives. It could be deepening relationships instead of just fixing maladaptive communication patterns. It could be improving our character strengths, so acting on our best selves, the qualities that make us who we are, like integrity, honesty, loyalty, teamwork, social intelligence. So the whole focus is on moving towards the positive instead of just fixing what is not working well.
Okay, so before you get to the positive part where the real benefits come in, are there oftentimes where you have to sort out some of the other issues that
absolutely.
Might be? So those happen first before?
They can happen at the same time, but of course there's something to be said for timing. So if somebody has come in and they've just lost their partner, I'm not going to be like, hey, let's, right? So you have to match people at the level of intensity, but also match people at the emotion they're at.
And so is there a difference, or explain to me how mental health versus happiness, two different things?
Two different things. And this is something that even the mental health industry, if I could call it that, also gets wrong sometimes. So mental health, how it's supposed to be understood is what we mean by well-being, but how it is actually interpreted is mental illness. So if you go to mental health, generally that means you've got a problem. Well-being can include some aspects of mental health. Typically it's around depression. But well-being is around the addition of good instead of just the removal of the bad. So let's think we've got a whole continuum. So down at this end, we've got negative emotional experiences, again, depression, anxiety, the whole 9 yards. That's in the negative. If we remove that, it doesn't mean people are happy up here. It just means we've brought them to a zero. This is what we call a state of languishing. They're not bad, but they're not great. Now, we tend to ignore that particular place on the continuum because it doesn't present as a problem. So people aren't acting out, they're not missing work, they're not having problems parenting, but so we don't see it as a problem. But what we know from a lot of good research, Corey Keyes in particular, who's my favorite, he's done a lot of research on a state of languishing and shows that if you stay in a period of languishing for too long, the odds ratio of becoming depressed over a 10-year period are about 86%. So what that means is if you're not living your best life, over time you end up living not a good life. So you end up sliding back down into the negative experiences. So a state of boredom is a flag, actually. That's a red flag. We should take that more as a risk factor than we do, whereas now we ignore it. But when somebody's bored with life, going through the motions,
So what if
that's an intervention point.
Okay, so what if I'm content? That's different than being happy. Yes? Or
Not
no?
necessarily.
Okay, so this is one of those. I was having this conversation with
Yeah.
my son recently over Zoom, and we were discussing this idea of should I be going after happiness, or should I be trying to achieve a level of contentment? And then maybe it brings up another question. Then, and I don't want to hit you with two questions, but I'm going to.
Yep.
Is happiness constant or is it fleeting? Does it come and go?
Yes, it comes and goes, for sure. So, okay, so this is part of what the science is trying to unravel. So there's lots of different views on this. Should we be chasing happiness? If there's avenues where you see you could be happier, yeah, why not? It's like chasing health. If there's avenues where you see you could be healthier and performing better, why not? But there comes a point at which continuing to chase health, chase happiness, chase success ends up undermining the very process you're trying to engage in, but also the state you're trying to create. So we also know from good research, people who chase happiness too much end up being less happy. So it's kind of
Because then it is fleeting, right? It
then
comes and
you're
goes?
actually forcing it,
Okay.
right? And anything you force, so think about a relationship. You force love, it ain't gonna happen. So it's kind of gotta emerge on its own, but there are things you can do to kind of nudge it in that direction. So it's a little bit tricky. It's kind of like holding the soap in your hands, right? You hold it too tight, it goes. But if you just let it sit, it sits.
Okay, then, sorry, go on, please.
No. So to answer your question, do you chase it or not? Well, that's going to depend on your particular life circumstances, but also can you achieve the balance? And do you know how to strive for it? So then it comes down to what's your definition of happiness? If it's just smiling and joking, okay, that's fleeting and that's surface and that's not really what we're looking for, although that still matters. We need to have fun. But we're also looking for meaning and purpose and lives that matter and are worth getting up for. But we each define that.
Okay, so then
I'm muddying the water.
No,
totally.
but it's fine because it brings up lots of
other
avenues
questions.
of conversation.
Yeah.
Exactly. So without me seeing a professional such as yourself, how do I know if I'm content or happy? Is it those questions that you'll ask yourself and you'll say, oh, I think maybe I'm missing something, and that might be a red flag?
Okay, well, not really a red flag. Okay, so let's just do it. So, do you feel you're living
for this now?
Yeah.
Okay. As my
This is for
therapist,
free.
go on. All right.
Do you feel you're living your best life? And what would a best life look and feel like to you?
So a week ago today, I got fired. So I would have said that up until 7 days ago, yeah, I thought I was living my best life. Now, that's from a professional standpoint.
Okay.
I have 2 healthy kids. I have a wonderful wife. So the things that matter, truly matter. The relationships in my life are important and everybody's doing well.
Okay.
So I'm happy. And even though what happened to me professionally, I still feel happy. I'm in a good place. Maybe because of the company I recently left, I'm in an even better place, I might say.
Okay.
So I don't feel I'm not happy. I feel happy, but I feel like there's a bit of a hole because what helped me feel contentment on a daily basis, the work that I was doing, that's gone. So I'm having to shift gears and find different ways that I can be content without 50, 60 hours a week.
Yeah,
That would have...
it's a lot of times, Phil.
Exactly. So I guess in answer to your question, I would say I'm happy. I don't know that I'm fully content yet. Does that make sense?
Yep. And do you feel that your life is fun and joyful to live? Is it punctuated by highlights?
Yes.
Or is it just meaningful?
No, it is 100%. Sometimes maybe too many highlights.
Okay.
Yes, I absolutely have those.
Okay. So I think what is worth maybe explaining is, what does happiness mean? So in positive psychology, we don't use the word happiness. It has no definition.
Okay.
It's kind of a, I don't know, whatever floats your boat. Rather, we use the word life satisfaction, subjective well-being, positive emotional experiences. There's lots of different proxies for happiness. So in fact, what we're telling people is the recipe is yours to make, but here are some guidelines. So there's different forms of happiness. One is what we call eudaimonic happiness. Now we're talking about Aristotle, the guy in the toga walking around the island. So Aristotle talked about meaning, purpose. He also talked about good character, doing good, and doing was the key word for him. So he didn't care what you thought, what you wished, what you hoped for, what you felt. Nothing matters. What are you doing? You want to be a good person? Do good. You want to be a kind person? Be kind. You want to be somebody that people see as honest? Be honest. So it's really about character and goodness. That's one way, and that's kind of what you talked about earlier. The foundation: happy with what I do, relationships, right? So eudaimonic happiness, I would think you're quite high on that. So eudaimonic happiness is great, but we also need to offset it a little bit because it's heavy. It demands a profession, a relationship, big investments in time, really lots of insight about, is this the way I want to live my life, values and purpose, these are things that keep you up at night. There's another type of happiness, and here we talk about Epicurus, another guy walking around in a toga on an island. Epicurus was a bit of a party guy, though, and he was more like, we're all going to die, it doesn't matter, have fun. Here's your cake, let's just get on with it, okay? Don't overthink it. Just live your life. And there is something to be said for that. Modern living is not really fit for human purpose. We spend a lot of our time in anxiety, stress, worrying, thinking about this, thinking about that. We're very preoccupied. How are we going to, make ends meet? And all of these things are valid. But we also need to live our lives. And here we're focusing on positive emotional experiences. So these small moments of joy, of interest, of curiosity, of playfulness. So these are the tiny little hits that we get throughout the day. They're very tiny. They're very fleeting. They last 2 seconds. You got to pay attention when you get them. And they're kind of like vitamins. If you don't get enough, you need to create them. So it could be the stupid cat meme, baby video, whatever. It doesn't matter. But finding little ways to give ourselves little boosts, because those positive emotional experiences, now I'm giving you a whole lesson in positive psych, again, really do act like vitamins. So there's a great theory by Barbara Fredrickson that's been tested out for years called the broaden and build theory. And this is the idea that when we experience lots or enough of positive emotions, it starts to shift, starts to broaden our perspective. So our thought, action, repertoires, this is psychobabble, fancy word for how you think and what you do, start to broaden. We think differently, we interact differently, we perceive things differently, we see ourselves differently. Even our health starts to shift in accordance to these positive emotional experiences. And again, lots of evidence in the research showing that when people are happier, defined by positive emotional experiences, they are healthier, they're more social, they do better at work, they make more money, better parents, better this. So, coming back, I've actually forgotten the question, but I think it's thinking about what kind of life do you want? Do you want it more on the eudaimonic side, more on the hedonic side? You definitely need both. Can't just do one or the other. And then that recipe, that ingredient list is really up to you. And it's got to suit you.
I understand that. It makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting the way that you've broken it down. But I would throw a potential wrench into that.
Yep.
Men and women, can you judge their levels of happiness, contentment the same way?
The research literature is a little bit mixed on this. I would say overall it's largely the same. But when we start looking at tiny pockets, so Gallup World Poll, I think it was just before COVID, again, looking at different trends showed that, women, no, and I'm going to get this wrong. If it was women were higher, men were higher. But I know at the age of 50, there was a reversal. And I can't remember now. Okay, skip it.
It's funny you say that, though, because I've seen stuff on social media where it's talked about, if man and woman are married and if the man dies, the woman ends up living longer, where that's the reverse.
For relationships, yes.
Yes.
Now, this stat I know. So also because I was reminded of it lately. But yes, single women are happier. When they're married, their happiness drops, and it's totally the opposite for men. When men are single, they're less happy. When they're married, they're happier.
Do we want to get into why that is, or
Yeah,
it varies
I think
from
this is going to
relationship
be a whole
to
other
relationship?
podcast.
Fine.
But yes, there are differences. When we look at also ages, so this is also changing a little bit, and it is changing as we speak. So typically, young people were happier. The midlife crisis, and then as people got older, their happiness increased. Increasingly today, especially since COVID, actually young people are like the most miserable of all, which is strange. Older people, they're doing well, and people in the middle are still kind of in that little bit of a slump. So we're seeing patterns shift, but typically, yes, people with children, with also ailing parents, trying to grow in their profession, like it's just coming at you in all directions. And the time of life, right? Lots is changing. So that is usually a bit of a dip, but not everybody experiences it either. So we do see trends, we do see patterns, but some are shifting.
So we started by saying that we've been out here for both more than 2 decades. What did it mean? I was doing, again, more research. It was 9 years ago last month that the UE appointed a Minister of Happiness.
Yeah.
Now, in this part of the world, we know that mental health is still, I don't necessarily think it's a taboo topic, but certainly within some circles, it's not as talked about as maybe it should be. So what did it mean for the UAE to appoint that Minister of Happiness? What was the message that was being sent?
I think it sent two things. So I think earlier on, it really was about happiness and well-being. And it's gone through a few iterations since then. But I think what it really did is put well-being on the priority list, that how people feel actually does matter. And how people feel matters for issues of governance. So when people are happier, they tend to go with the, I don't want to say go with the government, but they tend to be more supportive,
yes.
more supportive of government initiatives, but also, yes, more productive at work. They're better learners at school. I mean, we just see across all the indicators, happier people, happier country. We also see there's a correlation between subjective well-being and the SDGs. Sustainable Development Goals. So when, again, countryers have a happier populace, and we can measure this, Gallup World Poll is one of them, but there's many, we see that they're generally more on track with their Sustainable Development Goals. Where people are less happy, development goals are derailed. So it's not necessarily a causation, but what it means is that when people, again, are more productive, they're better learners, they're following, kind of getting in line with the program, governance is a lot easier to do. But also what it suggested is that, people's opinions and their quality of life and their life satisfaction, this becomes the guiding principle around which governments make decisions.
Okay. So
that's massive.
It is massive. And it is interesting. I remember in April last year, during the floods, where the government was so proactive about encouraging companies to work from home. Yeah. But it's, from a capitalist society, it's a free market. So companies got to decide for themselves. And of course, there were so many problems. And I find in many ways, the government does a great job of leading. But I'm going to bring it back to conversations that are very relevant for just about all of us, which is how do I get my HR department to not just say the things that they know they should be saying from a playbook point of view, but actually dig deeper to try to create, I guess, a happier work environment, which based on if we take that macro analogy and bring it down to micro, would then make people more productive if they were happier. What conversations need to take place specifically in Dubai for companies to recognize that HR needs to be more about just people and culture? It actually has to be more about how do I genuinely care more about making you happy?
So I think there's two answers there. One is leadership. So there's lots of companies doing fantastic work in the UAE around employee well-being, and it starts with leadership. So when leaders get it and they understand that when people are doing well, they show up to work, they're at their best, they're productive, they're innovative, they're collaborative. I mean, they're doing exactly what we want. There are very clear financial outcomes to that. And again, the research literature is quite strong in this, that when employees are happier, I mean, productivity gains are there, but also profitability gains are there as well. There's also a great study that came out not too long ago looking at companies on the S&P 500. Those who had higher well-being scores also did better on the S&P as well. So lots of different lines of evidence documenting that. I think the other thing that needs to change, and this is a failure of the well-being people, if you will, we need to get away from this word happiness. Because I think it just smacks of pizza parties and Pop-Tarts and stupid things that don't really amount to an outcome.
It sounds too fluffy, right?
It sounds fluffy, but it also trivializes it.
Yes.
It makes it sound dumb. Right? And I'll be the first to admit that.
It's like the old Bobby McFerrin song, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't worry, be happy.
Yeah,
but it's more
like,
than
but
that.
you got to worry sometimes,
Yes.
right? Like there are significant issues. And so part of what I do is kind of also working with organizations and kind of unpacking what does this actually mean. So again, toss the word happiness to the side, and it's really about how are people feeling. So are they experiencing negative emotions all day long? Now, sometimes you want a little bit of negative emotion. You want to be a little bit stressed before you go in and do a talk or a pitch or a presentation. You'll probably do better. But if people are pissed off all day long, this isn't good, right? But also if people are so playful and woohoo, having a party, you're like, is anybody getting any work done? So understanding what that means, but also starting to measure and map out how do people actually feel at work. Just to be seeing what is that distribution. So who's doing well? Great. Why are they doing well? And can we replicate that? Who's not doing well? Oh my gosh, what's going on over there? So I think we need to do a better job at getting across what is it we want to do, what is the purpose of that, and what's the outcome of it.
But you talked, the first thing being leadership. Yeah. And I've had these conversations with my children who are 28, and they're back home in Toronto. And I've said to them when we've talked about like work from home and some of the lessons that we learned during COVID, and I've said, I think it's, the old white men are still in charge, right? And I think, and I've said to them, until you're in charge, I don't know that will actually change based on what we've learned from COVID. So you talk about leadership, and I think that unless leadership has gone through it personally and experienced it, or they 100% value the research, because I think they hear happiness, and I think you and I probably have come across people who are much more comfortable with there being a little bit of tension all the time. And not just before you go into a meeting, right? And I think that there's still that resistance. And I don't think it matters if you're in Toronto or in Dubai.
Yeah.
I think But bringing it back to Dubai, do you think that there is a greater resistance because of the culture, because of where we are, because of sometimes the role that religion plays, and that's religion for so many different people in different parts of the world? Are those issues that are getting in the way of us having HR departments that do a better job? Or is it doesn't matter where we are, and it doesn't matter any of the religious aspects or cultural aspects, we just need smarter people to be more engaged and to believe in the science?
There's so many different variables there. I'm going to throw out a couple. So I think we all need to get better with our own emotional literacy. So I think it's just our general angst around emotions. People are like, we don't talk about that at work. Well, whether you talk about it or not, somebody's having a panic attack in the toilet. So I think we need to do something, right? It's there no matter what. So it's the emotional literacy and understanding, how do we bring that into the workplace? How do we talk about what is right there? And how do we identify that and start understanding how do we bring that into the workplace? Now, I'm not encouraging everybody emoting all over the place. That's not necessarily any better either. But to manage what exists and to start capitalizing or transitioning some of that towards the good. So that's the emotional literacy piece. I think there's another piece of work that needs to be done in HR departments. There aren't many standards for how HR is to be done and how well-being is to be done. So I think there's a lot of confusion around, what does this mean? What are we even doing? Are we measuring anything? I mean, I know there are still organizations doing the pizza Pop-Tart stuff, and then others are measuring, tracking, tying well-being to business outcomes, KPIs, holding managers accountable for well-being scores. I mean, they're on it. And they're seeing really good outcomes. So part of it is the maturity level of the organization itself. We see lots of variation there. And also, you've touched on it a couple of times, culture. How do we understand well-being in different cultures? So a great study, which I'm hoping to get in my journal, done by somebody here in Dubai, looked at how well-being is understood by different cultures in organizations. So for some cultures, there very much is the expectation that you, the company, are here to make me happy. Other cultures are like, happiness has nothing to do with work. I'm here to collect a paycheck. That's it. Other cultures are very much around, we're here just to get along as a group, don't rock the boat, don't make waves. As long as we're all good, it's good. So there's also the culture piece that makes things very different, particularly in Dubai, where every single organization is going to have 100+ nationalities. Where do you even begin? So another way we can think about well-being in the workplace is, how do we have respectful engagement? How do we implement human dignity in the workplace? So we can tackle it in different ways. You can switch the words, but at the end of the day, it's how do we see people? How do we hear people? How do we make them feel that they matter? That's it.
And I agree. And with that in mind, looking at how we hear and see people, I want to bring up the issue of seeing and hearing people on social media. And I think that there's a lot of bad that's happened as a result of social media. But one of the good things that I think, and I've said this for years, is that it's helped shine a spotlight on the issue of mental health.
Yeah.
Where people in the past might not have wanted to talk about it, and yet they've got no problem staring into the camera and potentially sharing it with millions of people. But there's also that backlash, I think, on social media, where sometimes there's the impact a video might have on me as I see somebody who has those visible abs that I've always wanted. So when do we know that social media is no longer having that positive impact on the self, and when we should turn it off?
So if we look at the well-being of young people, one of the primary reasons that people are identifying for their drop in well-being is coinciding exactly at the same time with the rise in social media, for young girls in particular. So young boys are also affected, but girls especially. So you're looking at, the abs, the great hair, the this, the that. They're at this great party, I'm not. How come? The bullying, social comparison. It's nuts on there. And it is really having an impact on young people's well-being. How do we get them off? Gosh, this is the million-dollar question. I saw in Australia just a week or two ago, they're like, no more phones, the end. You can pick them up on your way out. I think this is a great tool or a great strategy. So social media is definitely one of them. I think you are correct in, talking about, you mentioned stigma earlier. I think social media has done a very good job at decreasing stigma around mental health issues, but also create a second problem where everybody now thinks they have a mental health issue. rise of TikTok diagnosis. So everyone's like, hey, I think I'm a narcissist. I'm a borderline. No, you're not. You're just having a bad day. Stop that.
Yeah, it used to be that
just
we
having
would
a bad
Google
day.
stuff.
Yeah.
When there was physical ailment. Now it's this.
Yeah. And so this is a documented thing in mental health. There are studies showing that people are over-identifying with mental health symptoms and now diagnosing themselves having a mental health issue, which probably they don't, likely they don't. But the danger is that once you start thinking you do, you start acting like it. And sure enough, over time, you start to act like your self-diagnosis. So this is creating also another whole backlash in the mental health space where now we're like, okay, stop. We have too much awareness, and this is now going in the opposite direction. But also, this is my opinion, I don't know, is it always helpful to be sharing one's stories and stuff? I know everybody's into storytelling these days. Is that always useful? I think that is also contributing to more stigma around mental health.
One of the comments I see so often, because I think people are hilarious, comments on social media are quite funny most of the time, is that maybe we need to stop sharing quite so much.
Yeah.
And I'm the age, I was born in the mid-'60s, and I'm the age I am, and there was a time when the way that my father would speak to me is not the way that I would speak to my father, or to my children, excuse me. But I do think that there has to be some understanding that there are certain conversations, like you're not going to have with a 6-year-old, much like there are certain conversations that maybe you shouldn't be sharing that with the rest of the world. But again, I think most of us who are in shape have done a pretty good job of recognizing when we're full, and so we stop eating. How do we know we're full of social media and it's time to get off? That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Especially for younger people, where they talk about that dopamine effect that they'll get from it. And I think the worst thing that a parent can do is maybe, take away the phone, because sometimes that'll have the complete opposite effect. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about one of the taglines that you use, and I've seen this on your own social media account.
Oh dear, what am I saying?
Wear the red shoes, eat the chocolate, hug the people you love. So where did that come from?
I just made that up.
So I guess it's obvious, right? We know what the red shoes are for women, and now available sometimes for men. We know, of course, eat the chocolate and then hug. So is it all self-explanatory?
No, actually, I wasn't even thinking about red shoes now that you say it. Yeah,
or red-soled shoes.
Or red-soled shoes, whatever, yeah. No, really, it's just, I think it's about just saying yes to life. We spend so much time being worried about what people think, worried about failing, worried about, oh no, and it's like, what are we all so scared of? And I think a lot of this is conditioning as children, right? Don't talk too loudly. Don't do this. Don't take a risk. What will your family say? What will the neighbors say? What will the... And at a certain point, look, life is short. You got that great idea? Do it. So one of the things I've started doing lately, and I did not come up with this, somebody else did, is counting how many Mondays I have left until I die. And it's a very good exercise.
But you don't know when you're going to die. You're guessing, I guess.
So life expectancy approximately of 80. And we have 4,000 Mondays from the time we're born until the age of 80. I'm hoping to outpass that, but in case I don't. And when you calculate that, and my math is terrible and I've forgotten my number now, but it's like 1,500 and blah, 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 something. And when you calculate that every single week, suddenly you're like, what am I waiting for? What, next year I'm going to have lost another 53 Mondays? So it's about say yes, take the risk. Take the risk. Because frankly, no one cares. And everything you think people will say, they're too busy with their own lives. They don't care. And even if they do, so what?
Last question. The most I post on LinkedIn, and the biggest response I ever get was when I talked about how myself in my previous job, how we failed. And the most engaging post was that one. So it's one that I've learned to ask people, especially successful people, And it can be personal or it can be professional. But what is your biggest fail?
Not saying yes enough.
Interesting.
Which is probably why I harp on it so much. I look back and I'm like, did not act quickly enough. Did not say yes. Did not signal I'm interested. Did not just didn't do it. And it was either because I doubted myself or I just never thought of it. And in recent years, I'm like, yes, the question's not even out of people's mouths. Pick me.
Who's going to volunteer for this?
Yeah, me. Because I think in part I'm trying to make up for lost time and make up for lost opportunities. And again, life is short. Like, I want to live this thing. I don't want to just coast and be a spectator. I want to do it. So pick me.
Dr. Louise Lambert, thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.